Ejaz Heather. Top of the menu this evening is Afghanistan. The story keeps worsening. The last 2 weeks of April saw more than 120 Afghan security force personnel and 65 civilians killed in various attacks. This is excluding a car bomb attack on 30th May, which killed 30 and injured many more at a guest house in the Logar province. Meanwhile, the U.S. has begun withdrawing its troops from Afghanistan. The withdrawal, according to the timeline given by U.S. President Joe Biden's administration, will be completed by September 11th. Former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, in an interview to U.S. cable network CNN, has warned of huge consequences of Biden's decision to withdraw American troops from Afghanistan. Equally, she said that this is a wicked problem, and there are consequences both foreseen and unintended of staying and of leaving. Attempts to get an intra-Afghan deal stitched continue apace. The US, Russia, China, and Pakistan have called on all parties in the Afghan conflict to reduce the level of violence in that country. They have urged the Taliban not to pursue its so-called annual spring offensive. The four countries, dubbed the extended Troika, are trying to fast-pace a peace plan. The fresh call was made through a joint statement on Saturday in Doha. To discuss the situation further, I'm joined by Rahimullah, resident editor of The News, and Hamdullah Hamdard, an Afghan journalist and analyst based in Kabul. Thank you to both my panelists. Let me begin with Mr. Hamdard here. Mr. Hamdard, efforts are obviously on to somehow try and kickstart the intra-Afghan dialogue, but violence continues. As I said, last 2 weeks of April were particularly violent, with lots of lives lost, both civilians and security forces, as well as the Taliban. And then, of course, the bomb attack in Logar. Do you expect that the so-called spring offensive will not happen, that the extended Troika will be able to prevail upon the Taliban to not do that? What are the expectations?
I believe that at this time, both the Taliban and the Afghan government are trying to restart the peace negotiations. However, there was a deadlock there, and they delayed the Turkey conference or the Istanbul conference on Afghan peace, which was not a good news for both sides. However, Taliban said they were not ready to attend that, and they expected it in a later date, which is going according to their wish or according to their demand. Secondly, the violence that you pointed out, if Taliban and the Afghan government are to make a peace deal, I think none of them should make violence or should increase or escalate violence at this very critical moment that Afghan people are expecting the peace deal between the two sides very soon. We see that the withdrawal of the international forces is also confirmed from Afghanistan, and they are getting ready to withdraw from Afghanistan. So if they are getting ready to withdraw from Afghanistan, it means there is no motive or justification for continuing the war between the Taliban and the Afghan government. If Taliban are trying to continue the war against the Afghan government, they do not have any Islamic or legal motive or justification to fight against the Afghan government anymore, because the Afghan government or the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan is a Muslim state, and they do not have any motive to fight against that. Probably, if Taliban do make mistakes like the one in Logar province, in which the high school students were martyred and some patients at the hospital were also martyred, and many victims were trapped under the debris. People were taking them out from there, and that was a very hard scene to watch for all the people of Afghanistan through TVs and media. I believe that if Taliban make mistakes at this very critical time and continue to escalate the violence, they will lose not only the people's support, but also lose the ground in Afghanistan, and people will support the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. And if the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan escalate the violence without Taliban fighting them, then I think it will also happen to the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. So no one has the reason, however, Islamic Republic of Afghanistan has the reason to defend its people, because it's the government of the people of Afghanistan. They are responsible for the security and for providing basic services to the people of Afghanistan. the Logar province attack or the car bomb, when it happened, nobody accepted the responsibility for that, neither the Taliban nor the Daesh nor any other party. So if the Taliban have not done that, a third party who is trying to escalate the violence and to create some misunderstandings between the Taliban and the Afghan government, and to show the people that the bad or worse days are coming in the future, and probably it will take the Afghan people to the civil war once again. I hope it will not be like that, and this time necessary measures are taken by the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan and by the international community, and Taliban are not going to go for the civil war again. So I believe this time Taliban and Afghan government will reach an agreement, and they will sit on the peace table in Turkey or Istanbul, and hopefully they will reach an agreement. That's the expectation, not only from my side, but from all the people of Afghanistan, and they're looking towards a peace deal between the Afghan government and the Taliban soon.
Right. I'm happy you talked about the fact that no one has claimed responsibility for the Logar attack. So when you say that there could have been a third party, and since, Daesh has also not taken responsibility, what third party could this be?
Well, I guess that the third party could be the one, the countries behind either side of the peace negotiating teams. If they are trying to gain more on the peace negotiation table, then they might be trying to escalate the violence to create some misunderstandings between the two sides, so that they can gain more on their benefits. I believe it's not the right time to name some countries or to name them at this very moment. In the future, if we have some evidence of that, then I think we can name them and we can show them to the world that they are trying to disrupt this peace negotiation process between the Taliban and the Afghan government.
I think that will be a great thing to do, because there are spoilers and I think they should be named. But stay with me, Hamdullah. Let me get to Rahimullah Yusufzai. Rahimullah Yusufzai, we have seen previously that during Eid, there have been ceasefires. And it seems to me that since Eid will be in the next couple of weeks, it will be a very good opportunity for a ceasefire, and not just for the Eid days, but also a reduction in violence, agreement, even if informal, that goes beyond Eid. Is that something that you were expecting, or do you think it will be optimistic?
I think it is certain that there will be an announced or unannounced ceasefire during the Eid, and that is normally for 3 days, as we have seen in the past. So that will happen, but a longer ceasefire, I don't expect that at this stage, because, Taliban would like to bargain on having a longer ceasefire, and they would like to have, some negotiations before that, some concessions which they want. So, but, for example, the spring offensive, it will not be announced by Taliban. They will not say we have launched a new spring offensive, but, it's possible that they will link it up with the Ramadan and Eid holidays. So, they will not launch many attacks. There won't be an announced spring offensive. But before Eid and after Eid, there could be attacks, as we are seeing right now. So I think that, an appeal was made, as far as I know, by some ulama from all over the world to all the parties in the conflict to stop fighting during Ramadan, the month of fasting. But, nobody listened to that appeal. So I think that, right now, both sides, the Afghan government, Taliban, they are trying to, strengthen their position in the battlefield. And, as we have seen, Taliban have launched some new attacks in Kandahar. There were an appeal by the elected representative, the provincial council members in Mewan and Afghanistan districts of Kandahar, urging the central government to send reinforcement because they felt these two district headquarters may fall to Taliban. Taliban also are closing in on Ghazni, and the members of parliament from Ghazni said in the parliament session that Ghazni could fall if there are no reinforcement. So I think that Taliban are waiting, watching, and I don't expect them to launch big attacks right now. They may wait, because that will, if they launch big attacks now, that will damage the peace process.
Okay, now Hamdullah Hamdard was arguing that since the US and NATO withdrawal has begun, now the Taliban do not have any Islamic or legal reasons to continue fighting. Now, when one talks to the Taliban representatives, their argument is that since the current Kabul government is a puppet government that was propped up by an invading force, therefore the fight needs to go on until a proper power structure representative of Afghanistan is put in place. Now, which side of the argument do you think is stronger?
Very long debate, and Taliban have difficulty in justifying the jihad. Jihad against the foreign occupying forces had a lot of substance. These foreign forces were non-Muslim mostly, and they came from far away and they occupied Afghanistan. So there was some justification for Taliban to fight them, and they fought them for 20 years and forced the US to make a peace deal with Taliban. But now that they will be only fighting Afghan forces, Afghan versus Afghan, after September 11, if all the foreign forces withdraw completely as they have declared, then it will be very difficult to justify the war. But let me remind you, Ijaz Haidar Saab, that in the past also the Afghans have been fighting each other. After the withdrawal of Soviet forces, we saw the Afghans fighting Afghans, Afghan Mujahideen fighting Afghan Taliban, Afghan Taliban fighting the Northern Alliance. So they have been fighting each other as well. You know, that was kind of a civil war, or you can say struggle for power. So I think that it won't be the first time that Afghans would be fighting Afghans. But I think it would be much better if Afghans, instead of fighting each other, began seriously and sincerely negotiating with each other. And I am confident both sides can achieve something out of these negotiations. You know, because if you agree to negotiations, you are willing to, bargain. You want to concede something, but you also want to achieve something. And I think that would be in the interest of not only all the stakeholders, but also the Afghan people.
Okay. Hamdullah Hamdard. Rahimullah Yusufzai is saying that it will, and he agrees with you, that legally and, Islamically, if you will, it will be very difficult for the Taliban to justify continuing fighting against the government in Kabul. But as Rahimullah Yusufzai has also pointed out, there's a long history of the Afghan fighting the Afghan. So since you're based in Kabul, since you have the opportunity to talk to people in the government, what is your sense of what the government thinks and or how optimistic the government is in terms of the efforts that are going on in order to get the Taliban to attend the Istanbul conference after Eid? And what are the chances, what chances there are of somehow getting to a point where there can be a serious intra-Afghan dialogue in terms of, putting together the next power configuration?
The Afghan government is trying its best, and they have not left any stone unturned. They're trying their best. They showed lots of flexibility with the Taliban. They agreed on the delay of the Istanbul conference, which will happen after Eid al-Fitr. And Taliban are ready. They are showing some agreement to that. They also presented a proposal for peace in which they have asked for the Taliban members to be removed from the blacklist of the US and the international community or the UN. And they also asked for prisoners release. And there were some other demands as well by the Taliban. Giving or receiving a proposal for peace deal from the Taliban shows their flexibility towards the peace talk with the Afghan government and their willingness to continuing the peace talk with the Afghan government. This is a good sign, I guess. And the Afghan government is already showing its willingness to talk to the Taliban. They believe the Taliban are from Afghanistan. I mean, the ones who are Afghans and fighting as their warriors, they are Afghans and they have to live in this country. It's their right to live in this country. The war, the misunderstanding and everything have to end. The war has to stop because, as I said before, there will be no justification and no motive to give to their warriors to fight against the Afghans. In the past, there was like a misconception that the war continued between the Afghans, the Afghan Northern Alliance and the Taliban, or between the Mujahideen for getting the power. That was only for the power, not for any Islamic or Sharia reasons or justifications. This time, the people are not going to make the same mistakes. First reason is that the media has played a key role in this, the public awareness. The people in the remote areas also know who is right and who is wrong and why Taliban are fighting or why the government is killing Taliban and when the international forces are withdrawing. I believe there will be a big change when the international forces make their withdrawal complete. And once there is no military forces, there is no international military forces in Afghanistan. People are looking toward a very big change after that, and Taliban will simply have to look at the people's understanding as well. I mean, they have to respect the people's votes. So people will have their voice at that time. They will have to bring some pressure on the Afghan government and Taliban to go for a quick peace deal and make a quick peace deal. Of course, everyone will get and gain something from the peace deal, and it is in the favor of both sides, both Taliban and the Afghan government, as well as the neighboring countries such as Pakistan, Iran, India, Tajikistan, and other second neighbors, Russia and other countries. It's in the favor of them as well, and Taliban will also get a lot from that. If Taliban continue to fight, I think they will not only lose the people's trust and support, and also will lose the ground to the Afghan government, and there will be only the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan with or without peace deal.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was Hamdullah Hamdard speaking with us. Let me go back to Rahimullah Yusufzai. Rahimullah Yusufzai, you have been, and I'm going to ask you to make a prediction. I know it's difficult to predict, especially when the situation is so complex, but I'm banking on your more than 4 decades of experience of watching Afghanistan, of having known personally, spoken with, interviewed, actors on all sides. Given that reservoir of expertise and knowledge that you have, give me your sense of what you are expecting. A, that the Taliban are serious about a peace deal. B, that they will attend the Istanbul conference. C, that some breakthrough is likely in the Istanbul conference. Is that prognosis, more or less correct, or do you think it's optimistic?
Ijaz, as you have pointed out, it's going to be very difficult to make a prediction regarding Afghanistan. They have been fighting now for 42 long years. And this conflict, must come to an end. Now, I know from my personal experience that Taliban hate Ashraf Ghani and his men. They believe they are puppets. They supported the foreign invaders. They will never join any coalition government with Ashraf Ghani or Abdullah or others. And the same holds true for the other side. Ashraf Ghani, Abdullah, other people, they also hate Taliban. So, there is a lot of hate. It's even beyond distrust. It's very severe, I must say. So expecting them to work together for peace or to work together in a government is very, very difficult. Now, I think that either we, just get rid of all these guys and have a new leadership, a new generation of Afghans who want peace, and, that cannot happen, as we all know. But I think that, there has to be an interim government, a transitional government. Taliban may not join it, but they can recommend people to join that. And that government should be in place for as long as it takes to prepare the ground for, constitutional amendments, to prepare the ground for a ceasefire, to prepare the ground for, elections, whatever. I think that is very important, because if you just push these two different and rival sides into a coalition government, that will not work. It has not worked. Even Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah cannot work together. And how do you expect Taliban and Ashraf Ghani to work together? So I think it is very important that there has to be an interim government. There has to be a period of time in which the tensions, the sentiment can cool down. There are amendments, there are reforms. I think there's a need for electoral reforms. There's also a need for, accelerated reconstruction activities with foreign help, overseen by the transitional government, which should have, technocrats, experts, people who are acceptable to all sides. That is very important. And finally, I think Taliban had to decide, because they have to transform from an armed group into a political party. And they have to embrace democracy. They have to take part in elections. I think that they will have a lot of support, in Afghanistan. I don't agree with this Asia Foundation survey, which says Taliban have 11% support. Even if it is 11% in just South, it's quite a lot, because there are no other organized, established political parties in Afghanistan. So others also may not be having a lot of support. So I think that, that is the final solution. Any transition should be peaceful, negotiated, and it should come through democracy. That is how things should happen. It is expecting too much, but I think that is the way forward.
Right, a very cautiously optimistic assessment, prognosis by Rahimullah Yusufzai. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Joining me now is Dr. Kamran Bokhari, Director of Analytical Development at the New Lines Institute for Strategy and Policy. Kamran Bokhari, thank you for being on the program. It is, as Hillary Clinton has said, a wicked situation. I actually silently chuckled, because I used the wicked situation framework, I think back in 2007 or 8 in one of my write-ups with reference to Afghanistan. And she has said that it's going to be, there are going to be consequences, both foreseen and unintended, of staying and of leaving. So that's not much of an option, because if there are foreseen and unintended consequences of staying, there are those of leaving. So not much help as far as the Biden administration is concerned. So give me your sense of where you think this is headed. We are likely to have an Eid ceasefire. So my question to you is, could it be extended? Could it, if the entire ceasefire cannot be extended, could it be turned into some kind of informal reduction of violence agreement? What are the chances of the Taliban attending the Istanbul conference post-Eid and some kind of breakthrough, at least to the extent of a framework on which further talks can be built? Give me your assessment.
So Ijaz, look, yeah, I mean, Eid ceasefires, we've been seeing them for several years. They're really momentary and they're fleeting in nature. And so I don't expect them to last longer after, the holiday. Because for the simple reason that, look, there's a new reality emerging. The United States is, whatever troops are left on the ground, is withdrawing. It's creating a vacuum. The Taliban want to be able to advance themselves, fill that vacuum. They don't hold any large cities, but they're in the rural areas. So they'll be trying to take advantage of this window of opportunity from their point of view, and especially given the low morale, sort of what I would call the state of depression in the country, given that the Afghan state is anything but a coherent entity. And so, given the battlefield dynamics, given where we are in the war, given the broader context of the U.S. final pullout, I don't see a ceasefire. I think fighting will continue. And, if there is to be a negotiated settlement, then, last September, I penned a piece and said, hey, this is what it's going to look like. And, I would be surprised, if there is a power sharing settlement that actually lasts.
So what exactly is the bottom line there? If it's unlikely to have a power sharing agreement, then are we looking at a civil war? What exactly are we looking at?
So the civil war, as everybody and you know, that has been continuing since the late 70s. And so we're just going to enter a new chapter. We can call it the post-American chapter. That's the phrase that I've been using. But we will look at fighting. Now, the question is that, where does this, there is no such thing as endless fighting. You have to reach, and you of all people understand this, you write about this, that there has to be an equilibrium on the various sides. Let's call them two sides right now, although there are more than two sides. But for argument's sake, between the Taliban and the anti-Taliban, if the Taliban run into a situation where they meet stiff resistance, because nobody has tested this situation, neither the United States, neither the Afghan government, nor the Taliban, and nobody has tested what does it look like if the U.S. forces are not there, and then, how long will the Afghan state hold up in what area? What areas they're going to lose very quickly, and where is sort of that balance and equilibrium that'll emerge? I think that's when, the Taliban will be in a mood to talk, and I think that anybody who's a serious planner at the Pentagon is saying, is expecting this, and they're going to try to make sure that as little as possible of territory, additional territory, falls into the hands of the Taliban.
Okay, so I agree with you. I mean, it hasn't really been tested empirically on the ground, but there have been some indications. For instance, we have seen that, the Afghan National Security Forces have been heavily dependent for their support on U.S. NATO, air power. That is going to be subtracted from the equation. I'm not sure the Afghan Air Force is up to the task. We have also seen that there's been a lot of attrition. The Afghan National Security Forces have taken heavy losses against the Taliban. Then there is the issue of how long the ANSF budget will be supported and funded by the U.S. and some of its allies. So far, the United States has said that it will continue to give budgetary support to the ANSF, but, the appetite is running low as far as Afghanistan is concerned, as the Biden administration looks at other challenges, i.e. China, climate change, and the rest. So it seems to me that unless the regional countries reach an agreement where they lend support to the Kabul government, and somehow the Taliban have those reverses on the battlefield, the equilibrium that you're talking about will unlikely to have been reached. I mean, go back to what happened in Yugoslavia. I mean, the Serb irregulars, everyone tried to get them to the table. They wouldn't, but it was only after the Bosnian Muslims were trained and supported and armed, and the Serb irregulars had reverses on the battlefield that you finally could get to the accords. So, is that a scenario that you would think is plausible?
I think that's a fair analogy. That's actually a very good one, because at the end of the day, if you know that you can gain more through combat, through conflict, the cost and benefit analysis for a particular faction works that way, then yes, they continue to push ahead and fight. And there is if you will, a military imperative. If you're the Taliban and you seemingly have the upper hand, everybody knows you have the upper hand, then the next move is to sort of build upon that. And so for now, I think that they need to run into roadblocks. And the question is, where will they run into those roadblocks? What kind of, if you will, support to the Afghan government, and even more support to the Afghan government, will the Afghan government be able to hold together? There's already plenty of talk by various, elite members of this government that are saying, we're going to raise militias. So already the Afghan government, key elements of it, for example, Ismail Khan from Herat is saying, basically saying he has no confidence in the Afghan National Security Forces' ability to stand up to the Taliban onslaught. And so he's going to raise militias. He's not the only one. There are others doing the same thing. So what happens to the Afghan government? The first several months, I would say 6 months, will be very, very crucial to see, where does it sit? Where does it fall? And then we have to see, what will be the international community, both regional powers and international ones like the United States, will be doing to basically contain. Everybody knows the Taliban will make gains. The question is how far, and when will they be, forced, their hand will be forced to come and talk to the other sides. So I think we shouldn't be under any illusion that, we're not going to see, much conflict. And I doubt anybody who knows Afghanistan is expecting otherwise.
Absolutely, that's a plausible scenario, and I'm happy you talked about the raising of militias, which is a very interesting development. And so you'll have Ismail Khan, you'll have Atta, and you'll have Dosam, and various other erstwhile warlords going back to those days, and will be once again in the late 80s and the 90s. But I have to wrap up, but just briefly, I want to leave this thought with you with reference to how the Taliban actually conquered territory in the 90s. 30% of it was fighting, 70% of it was through negotiations and bribes and, where solidarity groups thought that their interests kind of linked up with that of the Taliban. So there's a possibility the Taliban actually trying to end run the Kabul government through alliances with, Karzai and others. But thank you so much. That was Dr. Kamran Bokhari speaking with us. We should take a short break and return to discuss China's diplomatic moves in South Asia. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. As India's economy stalls and the country is ravished by a second terrible COVID-19 wave, China is reaching out to South Asian countries with COVID-19 help, as well as other areas of bilateral relations. Economic linkages, infrastructure development, connectivity, military pacts. Last Wednesday, Sri Lanka and China vowed to enhance pragmatic cooperation in all sectors between the two countries, including the military. The pledge came after Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa met with visiting Chinese State Councillor and Minister of National Defence Wei Fenghe. The Sri Lankan President is also the Defence Minister of Sri Lanka. A day earlier, General Wei held talks with Bangladesh President Abdul Hamid in Dhaka. A statement from China's official Xinhua news agency quoted him as calling for the two militaries to increase high-level visits, deepen cooperation in equipment technology, broaden exchanges in specialized fields, and forge closer military relations. On Tuesday, there was a video conference with the foreign ministers of the South Asian countries and China on the containment of the COVID-19 pandemic in the region. Of course, when I say South Asian countries, India, Bhutan, and Maldives were not part of this conference. China is already concerned about the Indian mutation spreading out of India to discuss Chinese diplomacy, especially in relation to Sika. I'm joined by Andrew K.P. Leung, an international and independent China strategist based in Hong Kong. With him is Faris Hussain, a political commentator from Sri Lanka who's based in North Carolina. Let me begin with Mr. Hussain here. Mr. Hussain, there is a sort of, I would say a triangular configuration here, although not really triangular because India and the U.S. are, each other's proxies when it comes to dealing with Sri Lanka, at least over the last 4 or 5 years. So we know that in the previous administration, Secretary of State Pompeo was in Sri Lanka, talked about the fact that Sri Lanka needs to have a better sense of where to put its eggs. But now we have General Wei Fenghe. It's interesting that it's the Chinese defense minister who went to Bangladesh also, came to Sri Lanka also. And among other things, there's talk about military-to-military cooperation. So give me your sense of whether the Rajapaksa brothers are now convinced that they need to lean towards China, or they're still trying to sort of play China against the US/India.
And I believe that the Belt and Road Initiative is having a profound impact on the recipient countries. And it has greater Chinese outbound investment in Asia, including in Sri Lanka. The investment has been recently under scrutiny due to intensifying geopolitical rivalries, especially in Indian Ocean, as well as in Sri Lanka as a prime port in the region. And the present government is really working with the Chinese government mostly due to it's easier to deal with them when it comes to loans and borrowing money. There is a less stringent on what checks and balances. If we go to IMF or any other developed nations to borrow money, there's always stringence attached, as well as there's also checks and balances. So it's easier to deal with China. So the Sri Lankan government is definitely focusing and trying to borrow the money from China. And there's also a huge corruption within the government. And so therefore, it makes it easier for them to deal with China than dealing with the US or any other developed countries.
So you're saying, briefly, a supplementary question before I go to Mr. Andrew Leung. You're saying that, dealing with the U.S. requires more transparency, dealing with China requires less transparency, and so given the corruption, it's easier for the Rajapaksa brothers to deal with China rather than the U.S.? Have I got that right?
Yes.
Okay, right. That was short and sweet. So let me go to Andrew K.P. Leung here. Mr. Leung, it's very clear that China, and as far as the Indian analysts are concerned, they say that China is encircling India. But the fact is that, as Mr. Faris said, there is a lot of attraction of the Belt and Road Initiative in other countries. As a matter of fact, China even wanted India to be part of it, but India refused to be part of that. So, but that's another story altogether. So, give me your sense of what the Chinese play here is. Is this purely with reference to China's own idea of connectivity, or there's also a lot of realpolitik in this in terms of sort of encircling India, or at least signaling to India who the boss in the region is?
Well, first of all, let me address the Sri Lanka question and the Belt and Road, because of course, China's Belt and Road is President Xi's signature global project, and is built on China's global connectivity, because China trades with 120 countries out of 190. Is the world's largest trading nation, well ahead of the United States in terms of connectivity. So the Belt and Road is not just money, it's connectivity. First point to be made. Now, as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, in fact, the Sri Lanka's Hambantota port is the poster child in a negative sense, according to Western media, because of the fear of creating a debt trap for countries along the Belt and Road. So it's a huge problem for China. In fact, China's learning from this experience. It's trying to create more transparency, and it's trying to build corporate governance. Of course, it can't be done overnight. I don't think that Beijing would carry on and just say, well, forget about corruption, forget about that trap, let's just use the money. I don't think that China would go very far with that kind of mantra. Now let's address the bigger question about India. India and China's relationship must be seen in the context of a global kind of rivalry between the United States and China in a kind of generational conflict because the existing world hegemon feels threatened by the rising China in several ways. For example, in terms of history, whenever an existing superpower feels threatened, according to the so-called Thucydides trap, in 12 out of 16 cases ended up in war. But I think it's not just the threat of global dominance, it's also China's perceived to be eating Americans' lunch, moving Americans' cheeks in terms of technology and so on and so forth. And India, of course, plays the kind of spoiler in the game. India doesn't want to go head-on-head with China, but it's riding on the Americans' confrontation to push back against China because of the territorial disputes, but also there was a great game in Southeast Asia between China and India, rivaling for influence. And of course, India has a problematic relationship with countries like Pakistan, with Afghanistan, and so on. But China, of course, not all the other countries rally behind China. They're benefiting from China's trade and investment, but they also do not want to be China's beck and call. So I think that there's a bit of rivalry and geopolitics in this great game.
Okay. I want to come back to the security strap mentioned. Professor Graham Allison obviously has really popularized the term. But let me go back to Faris Hussain. Mr. Hussain, I wanted to get your take on the fact, of course, I mean, there's the whole thing about connectivity and you know, Sri Lanka choosing or having to choose between the United States and China. But leaving that aside, I want you to focus on the fact that we're talking about the visit of the Chinese defense minister, who's also state councillor. So that means he's part of the party, and the visit to Sri Lanka as well as to Bangladesh. So this and of course to talk about military to military cooperation. Is that something which you think is interesting, is intriguing, is likely to obviously catch the eye of India also, or do you think it's one of those normal interactions and nothing really new about this?
I believe the recent developments with the Chinese minister also visiting Sri Lanka. If you look at the couple of projects the Chinese has been working in Sri Lanka, especially the Hambantota port, which is now pretty much owned by China. The Sri Lankas couldn't pay the debt, It's leased to 99 years. And then, there's a artificial island that is created by China, and then they're going to have a huge portion of that owned by them. And so the Chinese have strategically placed their position in Sri Lanka, and they have vested interest. So India is worried that these ports, these cities could be used as a base, a Chinese base. So there is a balance that Sri Lanka is playing with India and China, trying to balance the relationship between the two countries. But I think in this game, the China is winning, and because they have a ground in Sri Lanka, because they have acquired the port, they have a place in the new port city. So it's definitely going towards China.
Right. That's how structural realism works. But thank you so much. That was Faris Hussain speaking with us. Before I wrap up, let me quickly go back to Mr. Leung here. Mr. Leung, you deal with trade, economics, stats, and the rest of it, and all that is very important. As a matter of fact, you talked about China as the biggest trading nation, and surprisingly, even those, for instance, Quad members like Australia and Japan, China is their biggest trading partner. China is also the biggest trading partner, second biggest trading partner of the U.S. after Mexico. So there is the thing about trade, and then of course there's realpolitik. There is what Professor Mearsheimer calls the tragedy of great power politics, that if you are a big power, you want to be a regional hegemon. So there is an existing regional hegemon, and then there's a rising power. And that is where the securities trap issue comes in. So do you think that at some point the idea of connectivity and trade will somehow upstage the idea of conflict, or do you think conflict is likely to upstage the idea of connectivity and trade?
Well, we're seeing these forces are sometimes at loggerheads. At a time when these all forces actually coincide for mutual interest, because trade benefits each parties. But now trade is regarded as by the West as predatory, and of course some of China's trade practices leave something to be desired. And of course that's right in the heart of this kind of overall rivalry between China and the United States. Now, as far as the military is concerned, and of course China is building military installations in some of the islands in the South China Sea, and is expanding its navy. But I don't think that China's, there is no indication that China wants to conquer other countries. And you can see that all these military installations is to safeguard a sea lane of communication, which is China's lifeblood. Don't forget that China's the stability of the Chinese Communist Party depends on its ability to deliver economic goods, and China's economy is very dependent on the import of goods and materials through the South China Sea, and hence you can see that all these military kind of maneuvers that are there, and of course that the United States has already a huge military installations in the so-called first island chain, second island chain surrounding China. And so if you are sitting in the chair of Xi Jinping, you feel worried. But this is again being turned on its head by the West as representing China's aggression, unfortunately.
Right, except that you don't have to physically control an area in order to conquer it. That's how the new sort of sense of or the technique of dominance works. But thank you so much. That was Andrew K.P. Leung speaking with us. This is all from In Focus this evening. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Keep following our latest updates to meet at Indus.News. And as I always say, since the third COVID-19 wave and also what's happening in India, please stay safe and follow the non-vaccine safety protocols. Good night and goodbye.